The day her divorce papers were signed, everyone thought her life was over, but what they didn't know was that this was the moment she finally chose herself.
The day her divorce papers were signed, everyone thought her life was over. But what they didn't know was that this was the day she finally chose herself. She gave everything to her marriage. Her time, her dreams, her silence. She stayed when it hurt. She forgave when she was ignored. She smiled when she was breaking inside. And when the divorce happened, the world judged her. They called her failed. They called her broken. They said, a divorced woman has no future. But this story is not about a woman who lost her marriage. This is the story of a woman who found her strength, rebuilt her life, and proved that divorce was not her end. It was her awakening. Hello, dear listener. This is not just a story, it's a reminder that your life doesn't end where your pain begins. At 32, Ayesha had learned the art of silence better than any language. She knew when to lower her eyes, when to nod without agreeing, and when to swallow words that burned her throat. Her marriage had taught her that. Once, she had been loud with dreams of studying further, of traveling, of building a life that felt meaningful. But marriage, slowly and quietly, reshaped her into someone who lived only to maintain peace. Her husband, Samir, was not cruel in the way movies describe cruelty. He did not shout every day. He did not raise his hand. His damage came softly, through neglect, indifference, and constant reminders that her sacrifices were expected, not valued. When his business failed, Ayesha stood by him. She sold her jewelry. She stopped asking for anything. She took extra work from home, managing accounts late into the night while he slept. She told herself, this is what love looks like. But love, she would later learn, should not feel like erasing yourself. Samir grew distant as his frustration grew. Failure made him bitter, and bitterness found its way into his words. You wouldn't understand, he'd say. You've never carried responsibility. At least I tried. Ayesha stopped explaining. She stopped defending herself. She became invisible in her own home. The day Samir said the word divorce, it wasn't during a fight. It was during dinner, spoken calmly, as if he were asking her to pass the salt. I can't do this anymore, he said. This marriage feels like a burden. Ayesha felt something strange in that moment. Not anger, not fear. Relief. But relief was quickly drowned by reality. Divorce papers. Family meetings. Whispers behind closed doors. People didn't ask what she had endured. They asked what she had done wrong. After the divorce, Ayesha moved into a small rented apartment on the edge of the city. It was quiet. Too quiet. No footsteps. No complaints. No expectations. And yet, the silence felt heavier than ever. Her phone buzzed less. Invitations stopped. Relatives who once praised her patience now looked at her with pity or worse, suspicion. A divorced woman must have failed somewhere. She should have tried harder. At her age, what will she do now? Every comment carved into her confidence. At night, doubt crept in. What if they're right? What if this is all I'll ever be? She replayed her marriage in her mind, searching for the exact moment she could have saved it. She blamed herself for loving too much, for staying too long, for not being enough. One evening, while sorting through old documents, she found her journal from years ago. Inside were pages filled with dreams she had abandoned. I want to build something of my own. I want to feel proud of myself. I want to live, not just survive. She cried that night not for the marriage, but for the woman she had forgotten. The next morning, something shifted. No dramatic transformation. No sudden confidence. Just one quiet decision. I will not disappear. She updated her resume. She applied for jobs she once thought were beyond her. She began saying no to guilt, to blame, to people who only saw her past. The world hadn't changed, but she had taken her first step back into it. Rebuilding was not glamorous. Ayesha faced rejection emails, long commutes, days when loneliness returned like an old habit. But she also experienced something unfamiliar: control. Her money was hers. Her time was hers. Her choices were hers. She joined a small firm as a financial assistant. The work was demanding, but it awakened something inside her. She remembered how capable she was, how sharp her mind had always been. Slowly, her posture changed. Her voice steadied. She stopped apologizing for existing. People noticed. Not everyone supported her growth. Some relatives accused her of becoming too independent. Some friends felt threatened by her confidence. Some men were uncomfortable with her boundaries. For the first time, Ayesha did not explain herself. She learned that healing is not about becoming soft again, it's about becoming honest. One afternoon, she ran into Samir. He looked older. Tired. "You seem different," he said. "I am," she replied. He hesitated. "I didn't think you'd manage so well." Ayesha smiled, not out of revenge, but clarity. "I didn't either," she said. "But here I am." That night, she realized something profound. She had spent years trying to be chosen. Now, she had chosen herself. Ayesha's life did not become perfect, but it became real. She built a career she was proud of. She formed friendships rooted in respect, not obligation. She learned to enjoy her own company. Most importantly, she stopped measuring her worth by her marital status. One day, she was invited to speak at a small women's workshop. She almost declined, old fears resurfacing, but then she remembered the woman she used to be. Standing on that stage, she said, "Divorce didn't break me. Silence did. Leaving didn't make me weak. Staying without dignity almost did." The room was quiet. Women listened with tears in their eyes. In that moment, Ayesha understood her journey wasn't just for her. It was for every woman told that her value ends with a relationship. For every woman afraid to start over. For every woman waiting for permission to live. She never remarried quickly. She never rushed to prove anything. She had already won. Because the greatest victory was this. She was no longer surviving someone else's expectations. She was living her own life. And choosing herself every single day. Divorce is not the end of a woman's story. Sometimes, it is the first page she finally writes herself. The apartment didn't feel like home. It felt like a pause. Ayesha placed her single suitcase beside the wall and stood in the middle of the room, unsure of what to do next. The ceiling fan hummed softly, unfamiliar and distant. This space didn't know her yet. It hadn't witnessed her tears, her sacrifices, or the years she had erased herself for a marriage that no longer existed. She sat on the cold floor and let the silence settle. For the first time in her adult life, there was no role to perform. No wife. No daughter-in-law. No expectations. Just her. That realization was terrifying. She made tea and drank it slowly, standing near the window. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had changed. People laughed. Cars passed. Life continued. How can the world move so easily, she thought, when mine has collapsed? That night, sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed memories she didn't invite, arguments she never won, nights she cried quietly so no one would hear, the way she shrank herself to keep peace. She wondered if she had made the right decision. Doubt crept in softly, like a shadow. The next few weeks were harder than she imagined. Not because she missed her husband, but because she faced people. Relatives visited under the excuse of concern. Their questions were polite, but their eyes weren't. Divorce is a very big step. You should have adjusted more. A woman should protect her home at all costs. Each sentence felt like a reminder that her pain didn't matter as much as society's comfort. Some blamed her directly. Some blamed her silently. Some pretended to support her while enjoying the drama. Ayesha smiled through it all. She had learned that skill well. But at night, when she was alone, the words returned. What if they're right? What if I failed? What if this is all my fault? Loneliness has a way of magnifying doubt. Her phone rang less. Friends grew distant. Invitations stopped. A divorced woman didn't fit easily into happy gatherings. She began avoiding mirrors because she didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked weak, but because she looked lost. One evening, she opened an old box she had carried from her marriage. Inside were notebooks, certificates, unfinished plans. A version of herself she had buried. And for the first time since the divorce, she cried, not from shame, but grief. Grief for the woman she never allowed herself to become. Healing didn't arrive with motivation. It arrived with exhaustion. One morning, after another sleepless night, Ayesha sat on the floor and whispered, "I can't live like this anymore." Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just honestly. She realized something painful but freeing. She had spent her entire marriage trying to be enough for someone else, and never once asked if she was enough for herself. That day, she made one small decision. She would stop waiting for approval. She updated her resume with shaking hands. Applied for jobs she once believed were beyond her reach. She faced rejection, silence, and self-doubt, but she didn't stop. Each application felt like a rebellion against the life she had been told to accept. Slowly, something shifted. She woke up with purpose. She walked with a little more confidence. She stopped explaining her divorce to people who didn't care to understand. She began choosing herself, not loudly, but consistently. And that choice changed everything. Ayesha got a call one afternoon. A job offer. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't glamorous. But it was hers. That day, she smiled for real. Work gave her structure. Independence gave her dignity. And dignity gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. People noticed the change. She spoke differently. She listened differently. She no longer shrank to make others comfortable. Some admired her growth. Some resented it. She no longer cared. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror and said something she had never said before. "I am not broken." Her life wasn't easy, but it was honest. And for the first time, she wasn't surviving someone else's version of her. She was becoming her own. Sometimes, the world turning its back is exactly what forces you to stand on your own feet. For a long time, Ayesha had lived like a shadow. Present but unnoticed. Capable but underestimated. Her new job slowly began to change that. At first, she spoke less in meetings, listening carefully, observing how things worked. Old habits of silence still clung to her. Years of being ignored had trained her to believe her voice didn't matter. But numbers had always been her strength. When a senior colleague made a mistake in a report, Ayesha noticed it instantly. She hesitated before pointing it out, fear tightening her chest. What if I'm wrong? What if they think I'm overstepping? Then she remembered something painful but empowering. She was no longer asking permission to exist. She spoke up. The room went quiet. Her manager looked at the report again and nodded. "You're right," he said. "Good catch." That moment was small, but it shook something deep inside her. For the first time in years, she felt seen for her mind, not judged for her past. From that day on, Ayesha stopped shrinking. She stayed late to learn. She asked questions without apologizing. She let herself take space. And slowly, people started listening. Not everyone celebrated her growth. Some colleagues whispered that she was too ambitious. Some relatives said she had changed too much. Some people from her past looked uncomfortable around her confidence. She noticed how success made people rewrite her story. When she was struggling, she was pitied. When she was rising, she was questioned. One evening, at a family gathering, someone said casually, "Divorce really hardens a woman." Ayesha smiled politely, but inside, something clicked. No, divorce didn't harden her. Silence had. Sacrifice without respect had. Being invisible had. That night, she stood in her apartment, looking around at the life she was building piece by piece. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. She realized something important. Growth will always make the wrong people uncomfortable. And that was no longer her problem. Life has a strange sense of timing. Just when Ayesha felt stable, the past returned. She ran into Samir again, this time unexpectedly, outside her office building. He looked surprised. "You work here?" he asked. "Yes," she replied calmly. There was an awkward pause. "You seem confident," he said, almost unsure. Ayesha didn't respond immediately. She searched her feelings, expecting anger, resentment, pain. But what she felt surprised her. Nothing. No need to prove anything. No desire to explain. No urge to be understood. "I've learned a lot," she said simply. Samir nodded slowly. "I didn't think you'd recover this fast." She met his eyes, steady and calm. I didn't recover, she said. I rebuilt. That conversation stayed with her, not because of him, but because of what it revealed. She no longer needed closure from someone who couldn't value her. She had already given it to herself. Ayesha's life was fuller now. Not louder, deeper. She had routines that grounded her. Work that challenged her. Evenings she enjoyed alone without feeling lonely. She invested in herself, courses, books, health, peace. For the first time, she understood that love wasn't something she had to earn through sacrifice. Love, real love, started with self-respect. One night, she wrote in a new journal, I am not afraid of being alone anymore. I am afraid of losing myself again. That sentence became her promise. She didn't know what the future held, love, marriage, or solitude, but she knew one thing with certainty. She would never abandon herself again. And that made her powerful. The most dangerous woman is not the one who is angry, but the one who is healed and no longer needs validation. Success doesn't always arrive with celebration. Sometimes it arrives quietly and feels unfamiliar. Ayesha's life had finally found a rhythm. Mornings were no longer rushed with anxiety. She woke up early, made her own breakfast, and planned her day without fear of judgment. Work challenged her in ways that excited her mind instead of exhausting her soul. Yet, peace felt strange. For years, chaos had been normal. Arguments, emotional neglect, constant self-doubt. Now, with stability in her life, her mind occasionally searched for problems that no longer existed. Is this real? Can life actually be this calm? She caught herself apologizing unnecessarily at work, over-explaining simple decisions, bracing herself for criticism that never came. Trauma doesn't disappear when circumstances improve. It lingers quietly. One evening, she sat alone with a cup of tea and realized something uncomfortable. She had healed enough to function, but not enough to trust happiness. And that awareness marked the beginning of a deeper journey. Ayesha had always been a giver. She gave patience. She gave forgiveness. She gave effort, even when it wasn't returned. Receiving, however, felt foreign. When colleagues praised her work, she brushed it off. When friends offered help, she declined politely. When someone showed genuine care, she felt suspicious. Her independence had become armor. Strong but heavy. One afternoon, her manager recommended her for a leadership workshop. The opportunity came with responsibility, visibility, and growth. Her first instinct was fear. What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? Then she recognized that voice. It was the same voice that once told her to stay silent, stay small, stay grateful for less. This time, she didn't listen. She said yes. At the workshop, surrounded by confident professionals, Ayesha felt old insecurities rise, but she stayed. She spoke. She participated. She allowed herself to be seen without shrinking. And something unexpected happened. People respected her. Not because of her past. Not because of her pain. But because of her presence. For the first time, Ayesha learned that strength isn't only about surviving alone, it's also about allowing yourself to be supported. Love was no longer a fantasy for Ayesha. Nor was it a fear. It was a question. She wasn't looking for rescue. She wasn't chasing validation. She wasn't desperate to fill a void. She had already built a full life. When someone expressed interest in her, genuinely, respectfully, she didn't rush. She observed how it felt. Was there peace? Was there respect? Was there space for her individuality? For the first time, she asked the right questions. She realized something powerful. She didn't need a relationship to feel complete. She wanted a relationship only if it added value. This shift changed everything. She set boundaries without guilt. She walked away without explanations. She chose compatibility over chemistry. And the most surprising part? She no longer feared being alone. Loneliness had once terrified her. Now it felt peaceful. Because being alone no longer meant being unloved, it meant being aligned. Ayesha didn't intend to inspire anyone. She was simply living honestly. But people noticed. Women reached out to her quietly, friends, colleagues, even strangers. How did you start over? Weren't you scared? How did you survive the judgment? At first, she didn't know what to say. Then she realized. Her story wasn't about courage. It was about choice. She started speaking openly, not dramatically, not bitterly, but truthfully. About staying too long. About losing herself. About rebuilding slowly. And women listened. Not because she was perfect, but because she was real. One night, she wrote in her journal, "I didn't escape my marriage. I escaped the version of myself that believed I deserved less." She understood then, her journey was no longer just personal. It was becoming purposeful. And this realization set the stage for what came next. Healing doesn't stop when life improves. Sometimes, the hardest part is learning to trust the peace you've earned. There was a time when Ayesha believed healing meant forgetting. Forgetting the nights she cried herself to sleep. Forgetting the words that made her feel small. Forgetting the woman she used to be. But healing didn't work that way. Healing meant remembering without pain. One quiet evening, she sat by her window watching the city lights flicker. The same city that once felt overwhelming now felt familiar. Safe. She realized she could think about her marriage without anger, without regret. Not because it didn't matter anymore, but because it no longer controlled her. She understood something most people never do. Closure doesn't come from conversations. It comes from clarity. Samir was no longer the villain of her story. And she was no longer the victim. They were simply two people who couldn't grow together. That acceptance freed her. For the first time, she wasn't carrying resentment in her heart. She wasn't proving anything to anyone. She wasn't explaining her choices. She was at peace. And peace, she learned, was the most powerful form of freedom. Ayesha's career had grown steadily. She was no longer just an employee, she was a leader. People trusted her judgment, sought her advice, respected her boundaries. One afternoon, while preparing a presentation, she caught her reflection in the glass wall of the office. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she stood differently. Straight, grounded, unapologetic. She remembered the version of herself who once prayed just to survive the day. The woman who stayed quiet to avoid conflict. The woman who believed love required sacrifice without limits. The woman who thought leaving meant failure. If that woman could see her now. Ayesha smiled softly. "I made it," she whispered. "Not to success. Not to status. But to self-respect." And that mattered more than anything. Love returned to her life slowly. Not as chaos. Not as obsession. Not as fear. But as calm. She met someone, not perfect, not dramatic, but emotionally present. Someone who didn't rush her, didn't question her independence, didn't compete with her strength. For the first time, love felt safe. She didn't disappear inside it. She didn't overgive. She didn't abandon herself. She communicated clearly. She walked away from discomfort. She stayed only where respect lived. And even then, she knew something deeply. If this love ended tomorrow, she would still be whole. Because love was no longer her identity. She was. That realization changed everything. One day, Ayesha was invited to speak at a larger women's conference. She stood on the stage, lights warm on her face, audience quiet and waiting. She took a breath and spoke from truth. "I was once a woman who thought divorce was the end of her life. I was wrong. It was the end of my silence. The end of my self-betrayal. The end of living for approval." The room listened. Choosing yourself is not selfish. Staying where you are unseen is. Tears filled many eyes. Ayesha ended with words that would stay with everyone long after. You don't need to become fearless. You just need to stop abandoning yourself. As she stepped off the stage, she felt something settle inside her. Completion. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. She had lived her truth. And that was enough. Divorce didn't destroy her. Silence almost did. She didn't rise to prove anyone wrong. She rose because she finally chose herself. And in doing so, she became the woman she once needed to survive.